Something in my closet. Why have I been looking so haggard lately, as if I've been insomniac for a long time? Why do I involuntarily flinch every time the kitchen cupboard door propped open by itself? And why, at my mid-30s, is the graying of my temples already evident? All right, listen to this gruesome story. You will probably laugh incredulously, as many people I have tried to tell my fears to have done. It wasn't long ago that I myself would have loved to join you. Until a couple of months ago, sitting in the light-flooded kitchen at night with a glass of cognac in my hand, I would have echoed my friend's mocking laughter with embarrassment and falsity. Now I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Every morning, standing in front of the mirror, I check how many gray hairs have been added in the past nightmare night. For some time now I've been afraid to sleep. Or rather, I fear that I will wake up in the middle of the night, awakened by the quiet creaking of the door, and a muffled voice from the dusty depths of the closet will call my name. It all started about 2 years ago. At the time, our firm was nearing completion of another major project. As usual, we failed to meet the deadline and had to return home almost by midnight. Completely exhausted, I had enough energy just to drink a bottle of beer and, not waiting until the end of the evening news, go to bed. I never complained about sleep, especially at times like this. The alarm clock was supposed to ring at 6 o'clock sharp, so that by 7:30 I could finally crawl out of bed and start another hard day. But I had to wake up much earlier. My eyes remained closed, and for a while I could not understand what had caused my sudden awakening. Suddenly I felt that there was someone in the room. I mean, it's safe to say with certainty now that someone was there. At that time it was just some vague feeling, which was difficult to put into words. Lying against the wall, on the edge of the unfolded couch, it seemed to me that someone was standing behind me in the very corner. On the one hand, I could not know whether someone was there, and there could be no one there. No, there couldn't be. There were no sounds coming from the corner, and yet I somehow sensed the presence of a strange creature in some unknowable way. I can guess what you're going to say now. That's what all the psychiatrists who have consulted me on this subject have told me. Many people have this feeling at times. They feel as if they can feel someone's gaze behind their back, etc., etc. If that had been the end of the feeling, I would have gladly agreed with you. But footsteps followed. After standing near the closet for a few seconds, as if to make me fully aware of the presence of a stranger, it went into the kitchen. The gate was not cautious. The unknown someone apparently felt he was the master, and did not even try to hide his presence. They were the footsteps of a lonely man who suddenly had to pee in the middle of the night. I mean, the sounds were quite distinct, but I didn't hear them in the way people usually do. I could feel the footsteps. I felt as if the sounds bypassed my hearing organs and went straight to my brain. Witnesses describing the experience of telepathic communication claim that the voice of the person I was talking to sounded right in my head. In the same way I perceived the presence of this being. It was as if the footsteps were born in my brain, and at the same time I could clearly imagine the place where they were coming from. In the same way I felt, rather than heard, the clicking of a switch in the kitchen. There was no fear at that moment. It came later, when the creature's visits became more persistent and regular. That first time there were only a few faint knocks coming from the kitchen, as if someone was moving dishes left on the table. Then the switch clicked again, and the footsteps followed back to the cupboard. And then there was the sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life, the quiet creaking of a door opening in the stillness of the night. I lay there for a few minutes, waiting for it to continue, but all was silent. The alarm clock was ticking softly, and the alarm was howling somewhere very far away. At last, having assured myself that it was all a dream, I calmed down. In the morning the incident seemed to me trifling and ridiculous. Busy at work, I had practically forgotten about the incident, and I remembered it only 2 months later. Translated with www.dpel.com/translator, free version. Then I came home rather late from some party, a little tipsy, and, after hastily throwing off my clothes, I fell into bed. As you may have guessed, I woke up again long before dawn, which in my condition was quite surprising. I could hear the muffled murmur of water pouring from the faucet through the closed bathroom door. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. The alcohol was doing its job, pulling me into a dream filled with fragments of dreams. In the morning, the incident would probably be forgotten, just like what had happened before. God, how naive people can be! Sleep was about to embrace me again, when there was a soft splash, as if someone was washing their hands. I listened, holding my breath. The splash was repeated, and then the murmur died down. I could feel it turning on the faucet, though I couldn't hear it, of course. It was a strange feeling. Then the door opened. Hell, I could have sworn on anything that through my tightly clenched eyelids I could make out a dim light. A switch flicked, and at that moment fear crept deep into my heart for the first time. Before, I could still take comfort in the fact that all the noises came from the apartments above or below, even though our house was of old construction, with thick brick walls. Even if any noises penetrated through the thick ceilings, they were too weak. Of course, my half-conscious mind could have completed the picture on its own, but when the light switch flicked, I knew it was in my apartment. Because I heard another sound. It was very faint, it was at the limit of what I could hear, but it was unmistakable. The thing is that in the switch near the bathroom, every time you click it jingles a spring that has come off. The ringing is very quiet, and if you don't know about it, you probably won't hear it. At least not during the day. But now, at night, in absolute silence, when not even a sound came from the street, it sounded quite distinct. I bet I heard the goddamn spring rattle. It was literally a few steps from the bathroom door to the bedroom entrance. And as I took those steps, something froze on the threshold. In describing the first incident, I forgot to mention that the sound of footsteps was quite strange. Not exactly human. The feet slapped on the floor as if the walker was wearing flippers, and yet not too loud. Just a quiet slap-slap. But I'm pretty sure just a barefooted person doesn't walk like that. So, as it stopped at the entrance to the bedroom, it froze for a while. I imagined it staring at me. Then, after a few lingering seconds, the flip-flops proceeded to the closet. The door creaked twice, something twisted inside, and finally it all went quiet. Thank God I was sober, or I wouldn't have been able to sleep until morning. But, intoxicated, in a few seconds I was already snoring, forgetting about my fear. This was the first time I had dared to talk about what had happened. I simply mentioned it, half-jokingly, at a party. My friends laughed happily at the scary story. Only one girl, I didn't know, changed her face. She looked at me strangely, but without letting the subject develop, she turned the conversation in another direction. I myself laughed in the mood of those around me, but the next night it happened again, and in an even worse form. This time it was going to the bathroom. Sounds funny, but believe me, now I'm not at all in the mood for fun. At first there was an indecipherable grunt coming from the back of the closet. Most of it was unintelligible, but it sounded like some terrible prayer in an incomprehensible, unreal language. The creak of the door cut a razor blade across my nerves, sending shivers down my spine. And again a quiet plop, plop, plop. The door to the bathroom opened and closed. And, after a few seconds of silence, no murmuring, no creaking of the seat, something proceeded to the kitchen. It stood there, again in complete silence, and returned to the bedroom. As on the previous visit, after hesitating on the threshold, it suddenly walked to the couch and stopped right beside me. My heart pounded so loudly that it seemed as if it could hear. However, as I struggled to pretend to be asleep, I tried to breathe evenly and deeply. I couldn't hear the creature's breathing, only a sound. A quiet hiss and crackle, like a gramophone hissing on the last track of a record. And the smell. The whole room was filled with his smell. It smelled like a damp corner of an old barn. Rotten mold and something else subtle, but just as disgusting. I lay on my right side, and suddenly, with horror, I felt it climb over me, settling into an empty seat. I was in the middle of the night, but I was still in the middle of the night. Now we were literally a few inches from each other. With great difficulty, I managed to pretend to be asleep. And I could feel it staring at me without pulling away. It looked at me with the cold, meaningless gaze of fish eyes, as if it knew I was awake and was trying to catch me. Translated with www.dpel.com/translator, free version. A panic attack prevented me from even opening my eyes. In spite of this, I still fell asleep very soon. Since then, it no longer returns to the closet. It comes out, wanders around the apartment for a while, sighing and grumbling in its incomprehensible language, and then settles down on the vacant spot. It looks at me. I know it's watching until I fall asleep. Strangely enough, I fall asleep quite quickly in these cases. At times, the other half of the couch is occupied. You know what I mean. On these nights it doesn't show up. Sometimes I'm ready to pick up a dirty drunken beggar from the street and drag her into bed, just to avoid hearing that squeak. And I'm afraid to fold up the couch, even though I don't know what will happen. It will probably stomp by me, sigh, and go back into the closet. But what if it doesn't? You ask, why not lock the closet? Oh, believe me, I've tried that. The door has a simple lock that locks with a little key. Just so the kid can't see his New Year's present ahead of time. I did that one night, but it didn't add to the peace of mind. I had the feeling that things had only gotten worse. Something inside was saying, better open it. But, unfortunately, I did not listen to the voice of reason and clutched the key in my fist. Like a talisman, I went to sleep. I woke up a few seconds before it tried to come out. Still drowsy, I heard it push the door open. Then again and again. Immediately after that, a series of blows came from the closet. I was instantly sleep-deprived. Clutching the key in my sweaty hand, I waited in horror to see what would happen next. The door was struck a few more times, more and more insistently. There was no banging on the door to get it open, but the blows were low and not frequent, as if someone had been beating on it with his shoulder to break through the miserable barrier. And just when it was beginning to look like the door was going to fly out with the next thrust, it suddenly fell silent. I thought it had calmed down when suddenly there was a terrible scream from the closet. A half-shriek, half-laugh. It was filled with despair, a nightmarish pleading and anger. a wild, endless anger. At that moment I myself was ready to scream in a bad voice and run out onto the landing, kicking down the front door. The only thing that held me back was the wild terror that pulled my whole body together in tight cords. I didn't even have the strength to pull back the blanket. I clenched my teeth and squeezed my eyes shut so tightly that my head hurt. I expected it to break out of its unreliable prison and attack me. If another sound had come from the closet, I would have wet myself or stuttered for life. Or maybe both together. But it was gone. I couldn't sleep again that night. I lay there until dawn, clutching the talisman that had almost killed me in my right hand. As soon as the room was bright enough, I stumbled into the kitchen, poured a full glass of vodka, and drank it in a gulp. I took my hand, which smelled of sweat and copper, and staggered to the cupboard on shaky legs. The key turned in the keyhole with the click of the cock. In astonishment at my courage, or rather madness, I opened the door. Inside, of course, there was nothing. That is, nothing scary or strange. A couple of suits on a hanger, an old leather jacket, a few small boxes of miscellaneous junk, and a burnt-out iron. And there was a rag stuck to the back of the door, which crumbled to dust the first time I touched it. I spent the next few nights at a friend's house. I lied about the repairs I was doing. But I couldn't stay in other people's apartments forever, so, expecting the worst, I came back. Translated with www.dpel.com/translator, free version. The first night I was home after trying to lock the closet, it touched me. At first, as always, it stood by the couch, hovering over me and grumbling softly. Sometimes I think I discern familiar syllables in that grunt. At times its muttering becomes more intelligible, and then I think it's trying to say my name. As it climbed over me, it piled on my chest in a heavy heap. At first it lay still, and suddenly it reached out to me with something cold and long, like a snake. Through the thin blanket it tickled my arm, as if many big bugs were crawling on it. And then it touched my face. The touch was disgusting beyond belief. It wasn't the feeling of someone touching your nose or cheek or lips. It was touching my whole face at once, all at once. It was probing me with dozens of slippery little eyelashes, like cold, wet snow falling on my face. Why hadn't I thrown out the closet? I don't know. I can't. Somehow it scares me more than the nightly visits. At least nothing bad has happened yet. Yet. You won't believe this, but I'm really scared. Me, a man who has been through 2 hot spots and made more than 30 parachute jumps. Several years ago I fell through ice and survived only thanks to my cold intellect. I'm scared. Every night when I go to sleep I am afraid. Afraid of my fear. I'm afraid that this time, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I won't be able to stand the feeling of deep terror anymore and open my eyes.